Some films are carefully thought out down to the smallest details. Sometimes the creators write an extensive backstory, and sometimes they build the plot on myths and legends. Reign of Fire is a perfect example of that. In this film, dragons are not just mythical creatures, they are the very reason for the Triassic extinction and the disappearance of the dinosaurs. The fire from their mouths is actually a chemical reaction. Two glands produce special liquids, and when those liquids mix, they ignite. There is no magic here, just a mistake of nature that nearly wiped out all life on Earth. Dragons reproduce like cockroaches. They eat their own kind. They can fall into hibernation for millions of years, and they cannot die of old age. It's a shame that the film itself spends so little time exploring this species. We actually know almost nothing about how they reproduce. How do they enter hibernation? Do they build nests? Why does their species have only one dominant male? And why does he eat the females? I think it's time we give them a closer look. My name is Evgeny, and today we're breaking down the film Reign of Fire. I promise this will be interesting.
That's their territory.
That's my territory. That's your territory. They're just renting it.
So, while watching the film, you probably had a few questions. Right at the beginning, we see a single dragon, but in just 2 months, their numbers grow dramatically. How did their population increase so quickly? Could it be that several dragons were hidden in that cave beneath London? From newspapers and articles in the film, we learn that dragons were responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs, and that this species has existed on Earth for more than 300 million years, which raises another question. Why haven't archaeologists discovered a single fossil all this time? Not one petrified bone of this apex predator. And yet, during the Middle Ages, there were many accounts of people encountering dragons. So to make sense of all this, we first need to understand the origin of this species, its unusual anatomy, and its method of reproduction. For that, we need to go back in time, all the way to the late Devonian extinction. 359 million years ago, about 75% of all living species went extinct. And in this story, the cause was dragons. This marks the first appearance of this apex predator on Earth. We don't know exactly how this species evolved, but some answers can be found in the early drafts written by Greg Chabot and Peter Hedges. It was their idea that became the foundation for the film Catastrophe, where so-called mythical dragons are not magical creatures, but a biological cause of mass extinction. The film's director, Rob Bowman, wanted to remove any connection to magic or fantasy worlds, so he asked the team to present dragons as real animals, creatures that follow the laws of evolution, ecology, and physiology. Early in development, the team had to solve one key problem: how these creatures breathe fire. Rob Bowman came up with the idea of 2 separate glands, each producing a different substance. In the concept, these components are stored separately to prevent any accidental reaction, and they mix only at the moment the dragon releases them. When the mixture comes into contact with oxygen, it ignites, creating a powerful stream of flame. Greg Chabot liked this idea so much that he decided to push it to the limit of plausibility. The first gland produces an oxidizing component, oxygen, while the second produces a phosphorus-based combustible liquid. Until the moment of release, these substances remain completely isolated from each other. But once they mix, a self-igniting reaction occurs, a classic 2-component ignition system. Systems like this don't require a spark or any external source of fire. They can be safely stored inside the body and precisely controlled at the moment of release. This also explains why the dragon doesn't burn its own tissues and is able to control and direct the flame. What's important is that a similar principle already exists in nature. Bombardier beetles use a comparable defensive mechanism. 2 chemical substances are stored separately and react only at the moment of discharge, creating a directed reactive jet. The film follows the same logic, biology pushed to an extreme scale, but not magic. The second important step was explaining how massive heavy dragons are able to glide through the air with such ease. Their size clearly contradicts the laws of aerodynamics, so the creators had to find a biological explanation. In the end, they decided to give dragons a lightweight anatomical structure, a cartilaginous skeleton. In other words, instead of solid bones, their bodies are built from dense cartilage. You might say that doesn't sound very believable, but a similar system actually exists in nature. Sharks, for example, If you didn't know, these fish have no bones at all. Their entire skeleton is made of cartilage. This tissue isn't as rigid as bone, but it's far more flexible and significantly lighter, which helps sharks swim efficiently and conserve energy. Dragons use the same principle, a boneless skeletal structure. Such a system dramatically reduces body mass while still maintaining flexibility and strength. In other words, their ability to fly isn't magic, but the result of carefully designed physiology. And most importantly, this idea also closes a major plot hole: the absence of fossils. After death, a dragon's body would completely decompose, leaving no characteristic skeletal remains behind. The only elements capable of surviving over time would be the teeth, and those could easily be misidentified by archaeologists as belonging to unknown dinosaur species or unusual predatory reptiles. This skeletal feature allowed the existence of dragons to fit into the real paleontological record without directly contradicting it. The most difficult challenge, however, was explaining the dragon's reproductive system. The entire film is built around the idea of one dominant male and a large harem of females. To solve this problem, Greg Chabot combined several biological models into one. The foundation came from examples found in nature, where a single male controls a large territory and a reproductive group. In this system, there was no standard fertilization process. Each female carried between 3 and 12 eggs inside her body. However, all of them remained in a fertilized ready state and could be stored within the organism for a long period of time. The key role in this system belonged to the male. He did not participate in constant reproduction, but instead acted as a rare biological catalyst. At the moment of mating with a female, a trigger would occur that activated the entire clutch at once. Fertilization happened simultaneously, which allowed the species to maintain stable reproduction even with a very small population. In other words, the male did not need to fertilize each egg individually. A single mating with the female was enough for the entire clutch, every egg already inside her body, to become fertilized. This model explains several key features at once. First, why only one active male could exist on the planet for such a long period of time. Second, why the dragon population grew in sudden bursts rather than gradually. And third, why the females remained biologically passive most of the time and did not pose a constant threat to the ecosystem. In the past, people had already encountered dragons, and those dragons were always females. Without their male, they were incapable of producing new offspring, so they hid in caves and waited for their alpha to awaken. In essence, this species can be seen as an evolutionary anomaly. Dragons do not function as a balanced part of the ecosystem. They behave more like a parasitic apex predator. When food is abundant, they reproduce uncontrollably and destroy everything in their path. But when resources become scarce, the opposite process begins, and it is just as brutal. For a dragon to remain in its active life phase, it needs an enormous amount of meat. If food becomes scarce, the dominant male begins to consume his own females, reducing the population while sustaining himself at the same time. This is not an act of aggression, but a built-in biological survival mechanism. At the same time, dragon flesh is completely unsuitable as a source of food for humans. People never consumed the meat of a dead dragon. Even a small piece caused a severe pathological reaction. Those affected would fall into a deep coma, similar to the effect of a powerful sedative, and never regain consciousness. That is why, in the film, the survivors never touch the body of a dead dragon. They know it cannot be eaten. Most likely, the blood and tissues of dragons contained a neurotoxic substance that affected the human central nervous system. The same mechanism also worked on the dragons themselves. The male would consume the females until the concentration of this substance in his body reached a critical level. After that, he would fall into a state close to suspended animation. Before entering this state, the male would bury himself deep underground, forming a protective nest. Meanwhile, the females continued searching for food, but because of the severe lack of resources, they quickly weakened and eventually turned to cannibalism, consuming exhausted or already dead members of their own species. Along with the flesh, they also absorbed and accumulated the neurotoxin in their tissues. This substance triggered the biological mechanism that pushed them into a state of deep hibernation. but some individuals failed to consume a sufficient dose of the toxin. Without it, their bodies could not enter the state of suspended animation. As a result, they remained active and continued hunting. At the same time, the absence of the male blocked the reproductive cycle. The females could not produce offspring, and the population was essentially stuck in stagnation. These were the dragons that people occasionally encountered throughout the centuries. In other words, the few individuals that never fell into hibernation remained awake, maintaining the illusion that the species had never fully disappeared. Using this information, we can close almost all the plot holes in the film, but several questions still remain. How long do dragons actually live? How often did they wake up? And what exactly is that cave we see at the beginning of the film? You probably noticed something strange about it. The walls look unusual, almost as if the rock itself had melted from extremely high temperatures. So to understand all of this, we need to look at every major mass extinction on Earth, because the film treats each biological catastrophe as a moment when the dragons awakened. The first event happened approximately 359 million years ago, the so-called Late Devonian extinction. The second occurred 252 million years ago, the Permian extinction. The third was the Triassic extinction, around 201 million years ago, and the fourth was the Cretaceous extinction, 66 million years ago, the moment when Earth said goodbye to the dinosaurs. In the film, it is stated directly that dragons were the cause of that last catastrophe.
Scientists discovered the true origin of these creatures too late. It was they who incinerated the dinosaurs, and their dust rising into the air triggered the onset of the Ice Age.
And if we follow the internal logic of the story, then the earlier biological crises may also have coincided with their awakenings. That creates a frightening picture. These apex predators have awakened at least 4 times, which means they are capable of remaining in hibernation for millions of years, surviving the changing of eras, tectonic shifts, and ice ages. They seem almost built into the very mechanism of the planet. They awaken when the biosphere reaches a peak of diversity. They destroy most of it and then disappear underground again, which means the cave at the beginning of the film is not just a shelter, it is a cocoon, a geological capsule. Before entering a long period of hibernation, the dragon prepares a lair, a nest for itself. We do not know whether it finds a natural karst cavity or creates one on its own, but before falling asleep, it burns everything inside completely. Because of the extreme heat, all organic life instantly dies. Fungi, viruses, bacteria, and the walls of the cave become covered with a glass-like crust. An effect like this can occur only at extremely high temperatures. The rock fuses together, the cracks melt and seal, creating a hermetically closed chamber. For a dragon, hibernation is a vulnerable state. During this period, its metabolism drops to an absolute minimum. The dragon does not hunt, does not move, and cannot defend itself. It must eliminate any external threats, parasites, scavengers, or competitors. Completely burning the interior space is a form of biological disinfection. But there is a second reason. After the burn, the cave effectively becomes a thermal chamber. The melted walls retain and store heat. Dragons possess an endothermic mechanism based on a chemical reaction in 2 specialized glands. Maintaining a stable internal temperature inside a sealed space allows them to minimize energy consumption during hibernation. So this is not just a lair, it is an incubator designed to last for millions of years. During the construction of the subway, humans essentially opened Pandora's box. Air entered the chamber, and the microclimate inside was disrupted. That became the trigger that awakened the dragon. Most likely, the neurotoxin present in their bodies helps them remain asleep for such long periods of time. But to enter a hibernation that lasts millions of years, they must raise the level of that neurotoxin to a critical maximum. That is why dragons consume their own kind, to accumulate the substance inside their bodies. The most difficult question in this film is this: who exactly did the humans awaken during the construction of the subway? A male or a female? Unfortunately, the script never gives a direct answer. The additional materials only describe the morphological differences. The male is larger, his tail is longer, and equipped with double membranes. He also has more pronounced ridges along the tail. I carefully compared all the dragons that appear in the film, and you can indeed notice that the dominant individual has a more massive and structurally complex tail. However, in the opening scene, it's impossible to clearly see the very tip of the tail, so I don't have definitive visual confirmation. Nevertheless, I lean toward the idea that it was the male, and here's why. If a female had awakened first, she would not have been able to restore the population on her own. It makes much more sense to assume that the male woke up first, the only individual capable of producing offspring. After his awakening, a kind of chain reaction could have spread across the world, causing the females to awaken as well. From the newspaper headlines in the film, we can see that both Kenya and Paris were also destroyed by dragon fire, and this may indicate the simultaneous awakening of several individuals. There is another important detail that is almost never discussed: the fate of young males. If females lay many eggs, it would be logical to assume that new competitors should appear. Yet in the film, we see only one dominant male. This suggests a brutal form of intra-species regulation. It's possible that the adult male controlled the population and eliminated potential rivals while they were still young. This type of behavior is well known in nature among predators that follow a harem-based reproductive structure. Such a strategy explains why, by the time the events of the film take place, there is only one king. And I really like how the dragons were portrayed in the film. Everything feels carefully thought out. The dragons look like real apex predators, not fairy tale monsters. But notice something interesting. Even in the very first scene, the dragon does not immediately leave its nest. It doesn't take off instantly, and it doesn't attack in a fully deliberate way. Most likely, it simply needed time to fully emerge from its state of suspended animation. From its behavior, it's clear that it still doesn't fully control its own biological processes. The combustible liquid stored in its specialized sacs is literally dripping from its mouth. This is not a targeted blast, it's a leak, which means the muscles and valves that regulate the release of the chemical mixture are not functioning properly yet. If we look at real biology, animals emerging from deep hibernation often experience disorientation, reduced coordination, and unstable thermoregulation. At that moment, the dragon is not the peak of evolution. It is a creature still in the recovery phase. Quinn was essentially just lucky. What he receives is only a splash of combustible fluid to the face without the full ignition reaction. If the glands had worked in perfect synchronization, Quinn would most likely have burned alive. In Reign of Fire, this apex predator is presented as a unique parasite on a planetary scale. But as we can see, even this species has its own vulnerability. They are almost completely blind at dusk.
You see, they have great vision in the day. They have even better vision at night. But in the failing light, they can't focus. Magic hour.
Like most vertebrates, dragons most likely have two types of photoreceptors. Cones function in bright light, providing sharp vision and color perception. Rods are active in darkness and are sensitive to very low levels of light. The transition between these two modes does not happen instantly. When the level of light begins to drop, the cones gradually lose activity, while the rods start accumulating the light-sensitive pigment rhodopsin. But this process takes time. During this transitional period, the visual system works unstably. That is exactly why dragons see worse at dusk. There is already not enough light for the cones to function properly, but it is still not dark enough for the rods to reach their maximum sensitivity. The film's production team clearly relied on real animal anatomy and physiology to make the creatures more believable. Their weakness is not just a narrative convenience, but a logical consequence of biological specialization. The film Reign of Fire had a budget of $60 million, but managed to earn only about $82 million at the box office. Director and screenwriter Rob Bowman cut the original script almost in half. According to him, he removed the first 5 minutes that showed large-scale battles between the army and the dragons and replaced them with the scene where Quinn writes in his journal. Bowman explained that the newspaper headlines and brief historical records were enough for the audience to understand what had happened. With the film's limited budget, he had to sacrifice certain elements. What he really wanted was to focus on making the dragons themselves look as realistic as possible. That's why most of the budget was spent on high-quality visual effects and the detailed design of every flying creature. Almost the entire filming process took place in Ireland, and lasted about 9 months. The local authorities signed an agreement with the studio in advance, requiring that after filming, all locations be restored. The landscapes, forests, and historic ruins, interior scenes, and some of the large battle sequences were partially filmed in studio sets. But most of the visual impact, including the dragon hunt, was achieved on real outdoor locations. The team also had to recreate parts of the city of London and certain elements of the castle as detailed miniatures. So when you see shots of the destroyed city, that isn't computer graphics. It's an actual miniature city built for filming. In fact, almost everything in the film is real, except for the dragons themselves. When we see the hunters flying and jumping from the helicopter, those are real aerial shots. The stunts were actually performed in the air. The surrounding atmosphere, however, was added later in post-production. Most jumps in films are usually shot inside studios, but not in this case. The dragon's fire is also real. Rob Bowman immediately rejected the idea of using digital effects for the flames. According to him, it's almost impossible to create truly convincing fire with computer graphics. Nothing looks more realistic on screen than real flames. Because of that, the crew had to build a special machine equipped with a flamethrower. Most of the dangerous stunts were performed by professional stunt performers, while pyrotechnics experts carefully controlled the fire effects on set. The crew spent more than 3 months building the set piece of the dead dragon. It was constructed almost at full scale, so the actors could physically interact with the body on camera. The structure consisted of a metal frame, a plaster base, latex, polyurethane, and silicone coatings. After assembly, artists worked on every detail by hand. The surface was carefully textured to create the look of burned skin, cracks, and damage. Every single scale was painted individually to achieve depth and a realistic texture. So when you see the dead dragon in the film, it's important to understand that it isn't just computer graphics. It's the result of several months of painstaking work by artists and set designers. Christian Bale initially hesitated to accept the role of Quinn. While reading the script, he doubted that the project could realistically be brought to life. There were too many large-scale scenes with dragons, complex visual effects, and an extremely ambitious production. The idea seemed risky. Matthew McConaughey, on the other hand, immediately connected with the story and agreed to play Van Zandt without hesitation. Moreover, he decided to radically change his appearance. The actor had to gain significant muscle mass to look like a battle-hardened hunter obsessed with war. The idea of shaving his head bald was also his own decision. Director Rob Bowman later recalled that one morning, McConaughey suggested an idea. What if Van Zandt were bald? They agreed to think about the look, but only an hour later, Matthew walked out of the makeup trailer completely shaved and said, "Why would a dragon hunter keep long hair if it could catch fire during a fight?" That's how the now iconic image of the fanatical, almost unhinged leader was born. Rob Bowman liked Matthew's transformation so much that he allowed the actor to experiment further with the character's physical appearance. That's how Van Zandt's tattoos eventually appeared. Originally, they were not part of the script. According to the early concept, Van Zandt was supposed to wear a necklace made from dozens of dragon teeth he had taken from his kills. But Matthew McConaughey didn't like that idea. To him, it felt too cliché. The character of Van Zandt was conceived as a man who had lived his entire life at war with dragons. According to the film's lore, he grew up in the United States, in Kentucky, and lost his family during the first dragon attacks. His body is essentially a chronicle of that war. The tattoos remind him of fire and dragons. Van Zandt is not just a soldier. He is the leader of a quasi-religious group of hunters. His bare torso and tattoos create the image of a warrior, almost like a follower of a cult devoted to fire and death. During the fight scene between Matthew McConaughey and Christian Bale, the actors became so immersed in the moment that McConaughey landed a hard blow to Bale's head. Bale continued the scene, but later he did need medical attention. Director Rob Bowman was horrified when he saw the massive bruise on Christian Bale's head. By the way, this is the first and last film where these two great actors appeared together on screen. One of the most difficult challenges during production was creating the dragons themselves. They were not supposed to look like fairy tale monsters or mythological creatures. The team wanted them to feel biologically believable. To achieve that, they studied how people react to images of real dangerous animals, trying to trigger instinctive associations and a genuine sense of threat. In the end, the dragons became a combination of several creatures. Their design includes elements of horned snakes, crocodile skin, monitor lizards, and iguanas. Their flight style and attack behavior resemble a hawk. Their claws and gaze feel like those of a true predator. The wings resemble those of bats, with a membrane stretching across much of the body, allowing the creature not only to fly actively, but also to glide. Because of this, the dragon doesn't feel like a myth. It feels like a possible apex predator shaped by evolution. Unfortunately, due to poor marketing, the film never achieved major commercial success or widespread recognition. But in my opinion, these are some of the best dragons ever created for cinema. What do you think? Write your opinion in the comments.